I'm Emily King. We're big mic adjusters here in Celebrate USA Foundation. I was too late to call this something, but what I'm going to call it is Bridging the Language Barrier with Poetry, How to Create Bilingual, Trilingual, or Multilingual Ceremonies to Celebrate Cultures and Include the In-Laws. So welcome and thanks to Cindy and Shar and Barry and everyone, and Kim, who was she was the year ahead of us, so she was our role model. We watched her very carefully, and all the great people at Celebrate USA Foundation, Priya and everybody, for allowing me to be part of this and part of the change in a lot of other people's lives, hopefully for the better. I've lived in 4 countries. I went to the College for the Deaf in Washington, D.C. as a hearing student. I know how it feels to live someplace and be on the outside and misunderstood or even better, ridiculed for the way you speak. I was a linguistics student in college. I studied 7 languages. I always loved poetry. I used to write it. Everybody used to write it, but I used to sing songs in lots of different languages. I was a trained operatic singer. In one of my incarnations, I was an editor at RCA Victor, and we translated everything into 4 languages, and I ended up translating opera librettos and the lyrics to songs by Brahms and Mozart and that sort of thing. So I kept my languages going, and it was always in verse, which was a surprise to me. So now I work in a school as a school secretary, where the kids could speak any one of 37 different languages at home in New York City. New York City has become a marriage magnet to people all over the world, because you can come from anywhere and get married in New York. They don't care. There's no residency period. There's no blood test. You got 24 hours to spare. Go and get your license and get married. So as a person who I have some languages in my back pocket. I can speak German and French and Spanish and some Italian. It's sort of been a good little thing for me as being a celebrant to say, okay, well, I can do this too. But what's interesting is now it's becoming more and more the kind of thing, that's why people call me. Because I would say I'm an omni-denominational minister. I must be a minister in New York City. I must have a congregation. And I have, as an ex-Catholic, I have no interest in organized religion whatsoever. And but what I found is a lot of my weddings are interfaith. And interfaith means interculture. And a lot of language is a lot of culture, and vice versa. I mean, when you talk to somebody whose heart is speaking in a different language, you have to make that leap to try and understand what their heart is saying. So in my spiel to my couples, I try to encourage them to bring as much as they can of the religion that they were brought up in, if they want to, and definitely the culture and language that they were brought up in, if they would like to. And especially because often the older members of the family may not speak English. You want to accommodate them, encourage them, make them feel that we have thought about them, and we want them to feel that they are as much a part of the community that we create when we do weddings as anybody else. So I've done a lot of that in my weddings, and I want to sort of give you some background on that and see ways that even if you don't speak 7 languages, I don't speak 7 languages, but I've studied 7 languages, you can find ways to help people bring those languages into your ceremonies. Some of my favorites were the Dutch bride whose 70-year-old father read a poem, and the English in Dutch, and the English version was read by the groom's 10-year-old American son. The Brazilian bride whose Portuguese had a Portuguese poem read by her brother, and the Australian groom's dad wrote a poem that he wrote in Australian. It's a different language. The most complex, it was a gift from Charlotte, was a wedding where the bride was from Peru. and the groom was profoundly deaf. He was from New Jersey, but he's profoundly deaf, and this is his second marriage, and so the bride's brother read St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians in Spanish in chunks, and then the 3 adult children of the deaf groom read the English in chunks, and there was a sign language translator standing right there so the groom could understand what was going on. So we had 3 languages going on at the same time, which thrilled me to death, I have to say. So this is how everyone can do this. Think about allowing or helping the couple to translate texts that they care about. You do like say, is there a writer that you love? Is there something you grew up with? When you think about getting married, if you want to hear this thing, doesn't matter if it's not in English. You pick it out. We'll get it translated. I have now got in German and French and Italian and Spanish. If you want to just email me and I'll give it to you. The wordings of the vows, the asking, ring ceremony, and welcome. And if that's there in that other language, even if it's English in that, or you have somebody else read it if you don't read those languages, it's just enough to make people feel included. And I think it's also very important, especially the vows and the rings, if you have people coming from 2 different languages, that the person saying their vows in the language of their heart. Would you really want to say that? If you moved to Italy, would you really want to say that in the language that you just sort of learned and not the language that you grew up with? So think about what it must be like for them and give them that opportunity. And I mostly do repeat after me ceremonies, but you could always just write it on a little card and have them read it off of it. It's their vow. So for the vows and the rings, it's been really, I'm beginning to feel people really like to say it in their home language. Ask if there's family members or friends who would like to participate in reading poetry, something they want to contribute or something that the bride or groom picks, and then having somebody from the other side of the family read it in English. If it's an English, sometimes it's 2 different languages, and that's more confusing than I can contemplate, but usually somebody speaks English basically and somebody else doesn't. And it's another place where you can ask parents or grandparents to get involved. Grandmothers love to read the wine blessing. They love it. And of course, the wine blessing I use is from Passover. So, it's already translated into English, so it can, you can find it in any language. Which, does that bring me to 3? No, 5? No, 4. Oh, 4's down there. Oh, okay. Use the internet. There are web resources, incredible resources. The Bible is in 147 different dialects and languages, and it's organized so you can find, if you know that you want Luke 2, verse 5, it's there. You don't have to read through the whole thing. So have that at your fingertips to be able to say, and of course I constantly use St. Paul, because it doesn't mention Jesus. I have to say that's one of my, I can talk about Jesus, but for the most part, I personally don't think St. Paul wrote it. I think he stole it from somebody else because it's not proselytizing at all. It's just about love. It's about love and maturity and seeing things differently as an adult than you did as a child. And it's gorgeous in any language, and it is all over the internet. It's also a way to help reassure elders and believers in organized religion that yes, this in fact is a marriage, is a wedding, and I talk about the sacredness of this circle of people who love you creates a sacred space for this ceremony, but they do feel reassured when they hear something scriptural that they recognize. So you can also access things from other religions, Arabic, Sanskrit, Persian, and other sacred texts with the translations that they might want to use, if they want to use in their home language, and you can supply the English translation. You can create your own translations when the English-speaking family cooperates with the co-presents with a home language reader. So something that they love, get a translation, and then ask somebody else to help. the way to honor and include and celebrate and smooth the way for these two families who are looking at each other going, whoa, who are, I don't know, what did I wear? I don't know, look at that, but what happens, and we always say when you tell the story, that sort of tension dissipates, in the introduction of the couple. But if a lot of people aren't understanding the story, this way of having just at least a poem or a piece of scripture or part of the vows or something in that home language is another thing that just relaxes the tension and lets people be part of creating that community of support. And so here's a little trick, is to divide something like St. Paul that's so well known into small sections and alternate it, English and the other language. So St. Paul in Love, or the so-called Apache, it's not Apache, wedding prayer. So the first time I did that was my favorite one, which was on the beach in Coney Island. This couple, they wanted to get married in Ruby's, which is a dive bar on Coney Island. Luckily, it was March and it was closed. So we're out on the beach, and there's like between thunderstorms, we're like, we're going to the boardwalk, thunderstorm, and then we run out. So we ran out. We had I could see another storm was right over there, so we had 10 minutes. But it was the beach. So it was bilingual. It was my first bilingual Spanish-English ceremony. And the bride was from Queens and the groom was from Argentina. And somehow it became inevitably a sand ceremony because sand all over us. So at the end of the Apache wedding prayer in half in Spanish, I sprinkled a little sand over their hands. So you have to kind of imagine that their hands are clasped, and this is sand. So this is in closing. I'm going to read that because I have to run out of here at 4 to do a bilingual wedding in French and English for a couple from Geneva, Switzerland, who are Italian and Indonesian, under the Brooklyn Bridge. So here's the Latino Apache wedding prayer. Now you will feel no rain, for each of you will be shelter for the other. Ahora ustedes no sentirán frío, porque cada uno será calor para el otro. Now you will feel no loneliness, for each of you will be companion to the other. Ahora ustedes son dos personas, pero hay tres vidas ante ustedes. La vida de él, la vida de ella, y la vida juntas. Thank you very much.